The No Child Left Behind Act was signed into law by President George W. Bush on January 8th of 2002. It mandated annual testing in reading and mathematics such that if schools did not show adequate yearly progress, they were under threat of sanction, state takeover, or even closing. Essentially, what this meant for my state was that year by year we were going to score worse than other states because poverty necessarily produces distractions from schoolwork, and our state is very much struggling with poverty. The effects of this were most noticeable in high school, when you would meet kids from Dallas, Texas, or New York who were talking about AP history of Latin dialectics, or AP Turkish, or something ridiculous like that. Meanwhile, you were stuck with environmental science and APUSH. This effect wasn't as noticeable in my home region because generally folks were wealthier and could afford to hire tutors to stay home and teach their children, which brought our test scores up. But I've heard of high schools with only 1 or 2 AP classes. In any case, the legislation left everyone wanting and deprived kids of opportunity all over the nation. In fact, there are a slew of arguments having to do with why this act was a real house of educational horrors, none of which are very nice to Mr. Bush and his educational dictums.
How is our children learning?
But that isn't what this video is going to be about. Instead, today I'll talk about my experience, and probably yours as well, with standardized testing growing up, and relate it to a historical archetype which I think is sorely lacking from modern society: the rite of passage. So, the year is 2007, or whatever year I started 3rd grade, and I'm about to do what every 3rd through 12th grader must do at the end of the year: the West Test. Not only will it measure my aptitude for math, science, reading, and the social studies, but it will determine whether or not my school is producing individuals fit for the new stages of their lives, and since my school is being judged on my performance, whether I am fit for a new stage of life. I've waited years for this. Music class has watched movies instead of playing drums so the big kids could focus for this. I've been given longer recesses so that teachers could better dedicate themselves to handling this. I've been educated in the methods of test taking to a T, waiting for this. Now, I have finally reached the age where I am fit to be judged by my society, by my superiors, and noticed for my performance. This is big, because I am big, and I cannot disappoint. Anyway, let's talk about the Amazon. In the deep, lush forests of the Amazon, many tribes are still secreted away, practicing the mystifying and enticing rituals of a world lost to time, hunting, gathering ancient religions, ancient rituals. Visiting one of these tribes, if they decide themselves friendly towards your presence, which I wouldn't blame them if they didn't, can be like stepping into a time machine. Smoke fills the air as you are greeted by scantily clad tribesmen whose bodies freely embrace the open air, shamelessly, a practice totally foreign to us sweater-clad modernites. Every act here can be a spiritual rite: hunting, gathering, basket weaving, the construction of a house, all everyday practices unimpeachably tied to the very survival of an individual. There is no such thing as laziness here, except in death. And bravery is known personally as so much more than a mere anecdote. Then the chief asks you to put your hands in this glove full of painful ants because he thinks it'd be funny. But no, it's so much more than that. This is not just some weird sadistic hazing ritual that is performed upon unwise initiates and young ones like snipe hunting. It's a practice of self-realization, of becoming yourself in a way that's not superficial but intensely introverted. It is about pain, endurance, and largely death. Your death. You see, for years, human societies have held this intense belief that in order to become truly in touch with oneself and his human nature, one must die and be born again. It's not just an Amazon thing, it's a human thing. Hardcore Buddhists strive towards death of the ego as a process of becoming one with the workings of the universe. Christians have baptisms and anointings as a method of becoming reborn. Counterculture hippies drop tons of acid in an effort to achieve ego death. Jordan B. Peterson gave a lecture in 2017 about psychedelics that is very interesting, especially considering his generally conservative standpoints, in that it seems to favor psychedelics as a means of self-realization and personal change. In his own words, subjects in tests on the effects of psychedelics like DMT often find that
the experience is like one of the three most important things that's ever happened to them.
In this lecture, he seems to suggest that a psychedelic journey takes us beyond our ego, the first layer of our psychology that constitutes our personalities and beliefs about ourselves. Psychedelics take us into the universal hidden within the particulars of ourselves. He even describes psychedelic journeys that detail a literal death, ascending into a different realm and return to the human body as a changed individual. It's unsurprising that this video is so popular, especially considering that it touches on an element of the quintessential human experience which we have forgotten in the throes of pleasure and individuality: universality. The notion that our personality and individuality is an illusion of the psyche, and that to assert our unique personhood and truly realize our potential, we must become formally in touch with our non-uniqueness, with the fact that we are only a part of a universal process, unstoppable and unchangeable, that hangs around in the lesser visited parts of our psyches. Religious historian Mircea Eliade is notable in his belief that as long as you have not grasped that you have to die to grow, you are a troubled guest on the dark earth. I, of course, have ripped this quote from a video called Moonrise Kingdom: The Power of Rituals by the channel Storytellers, which I will link to in the description below. In this video essay, Storytellers presents their analysis of Moonrise Kingdom as a journey into the lesser recognized parts of self, reconciliation of masculine and feminine archetypes within the individual, and overall a process of death and rebirth. The video interprets the story of Susie and Sam as a process of dying, descending into chaos, and coming out anew, more in touch and grounded. But what I really want to focus on here is a Mircea Eliade quote that comes about 1 minute and 12 seconds into the analysis. In the modern Western world, significant initiation is practically non-existent. Here is where I'll return to my analogy of the West test, my home state of West Virginia's standardized test. When I thought of the standardized test each year, I didn't get the same feeling as when I thought of your average math or science test. It was something deeper, more uncomfortable. I would find myself practicing long division and multiplication frantically nights beforehand, not because I wanted to get a good grade and get into the good classes, but just because I wanted the good grade. It wasn't the real-life implications of the test that scared me, it was the inward implication. This test measures me as a person and how I fit the valued traits of our society: logical intelligence, mathematical aptitude, and a propensity for science. When I received those results come August, I looked on them not like my average report card, but as though I were looking into a mirror. For many, standardized testing is the closest they will ever get to the death ritual, but they don't come out on the other side measured by their own reactions to personal adversity, namely the pain of a bullet ant's sting, the reconciliation of personal wrongdoing, or being forced to confront inherent contradictions in one's inner sense of self and personhood. Muslims have Ramadan, in which we struggle with the fast to connect ourselves with members of our community who struggle every day. Christians have baptism, which helps them to reconcile with their personal shortcomings. Amazonians have the bullet ant ritual to prove themselves enduring and stalwart. The rituals are standardized. You must do the dance after wearing the gloves regardless of whether you want to or not. You must listen to the rules of the West Test regardless of whether you know them or not. You cannot speak out of turn during your baptism, or you will ruin the sanctity of the ritual. You cannot speak during the West Test because you will ruin the integrity of the test you suffer during Ramadan, along with everyone else you know, while all year long elementary schoolers fear having to test for hours on end. We come out of this secular state ritual measured by state-sponsored standards of fitness for life in a post-personhood society, in which competition with other nations like China or Finland is the main impetus for change and betterment. Betterment simply meaning the ability to perform high-skilled jobs and contribute to a competitive economy. Now, I don't mean to say that this is all just evil, modern, industrial propaganda and that science and math aren't important. I believe that education in the empirical sciences is incredibly important in a prosperous and sustainable society. What I'm trying to say is that isn't it quite sad that we never got to experience the ritual of death and rebirth? The closest we ever got to proving ourselves as individuals was laboring in preparation for a test that functioned as part of a failing system of measuring schools. Where were our mentors? Where were our traditions? Where were our defining experiences? It seems that we've lost touch with our sense of necessity in worldliness, and that our personal worth can only be proven through superficial, outward means, buying new clothes, associating with fan bases, indulging in some trendy new thing, or scoring high on a test. Whether it be a struggle for liberation that dies within a year or a TV show, we are constantly looking for outward affirmations of ourselves and forgetting the inward affirmation. The only universally binding, defining experience my generation ever got was standardized testing, later the SAT or ACT. At the death of true universal religion, which occurred in the 1800s with the beginning of the age of ideology, we stood at the precipice of a defining moment in human history. Would we choose to resign ourselves to the outward world, constantly striving to increase comfort and solipsistic enjoyment in life and neglecting our duties towards our inward selves and our communities? Or would we create new cultures, new communities, new moralities, and new traditions that didn't need the sanction of some capricious god to move us? Would we forget ourselves just as we were on the verge of self-realization? It seems to me that we chose the first path, and that consumerism has at last consumed us as we come to blows with the consequences of the cultural paths that we've followed: climate change, growing income inequality, depression, and alienation. I feel that I can't really do justice to the world I live in, so I will leave it instead to the Honorable Hunter S. Thompson.
We're all wired into a survival trip now. No more of the speed that fueled the 60s. That was the fatal flaw in Tim Leary's trip. He crashed around America selling consciousness expansion, without ever giving a thought to the grim meat-hook realities that were lying in wait for all those people who took him seriously. All those pathetically eager acid freaks who thought they could buy peace and understanding for $3 a hit. But their loss and failure is ours too. What Leary took down with him was the central illusion of a whole lifestyle that he helped create. A generation of permanent cripples, failed seekers, who never understood the essential old mystic fallacy of the acid culture. The desperate assumption that somebody, or at least some force, is tending the light at the end of the tunnel.